Hello, I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News, episode 256. Welcome to the week of 13 November 2022. We've got Billbug, Pushwoosh, Github, FTX, K-12 schools without security say it isn't so, Eli Lilly, Peter Klimek, and more on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
How is your business staying one step ahead of cybercriminals? Secure your email applications, network, and data with Barracuda. Protect your business and go from zero to security in no time flat. Whether your team is working in one location or many, Barracuda has solutions that are easy to buy, deploy, and use. Learn how Barracuda can protect your business against ransomware, phishing, and other cyber attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Barracuda, your journey secured. All right, it's the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White, and welcome to the show. You know, I want a cool APT name, though. I really do. Octorang is good, you know, but the APT called Billbug, whatever that means, or Spring Dragon, that's a little better. So they have some other name. I think they call Lotus Flower or something as well. But the APT called Billbug is believed to be now a state-sponsored organization working for the People's Republic of China. Imagine that. That group has been active for about 6 years, and they've been being tracked by Symantec. And Symantec released a report today that Billbug has been targeting a CERT authority company in order to try to deploy signed malware. The warning extended that Billbug has been targeting many other government agencies and defense organizations, particularly in Asian countries. But they were using that CERT. They were trying. I don't think they succeeded. Symantec said the APT typically uses really common tools once they get into the network, and they didn't know exactly how they were getting into network, but they use common tools, and they had a whole list of tools in the article. But they said now they're combining these with an open source tool called Stowaway, which is a Go-based proxy tool which can bypass network access restrictions. And that additionally, the reason they were pretty sure it was Billbug was because they were using two custom backdoors, which they had previously used, that are called Hanatog and Sage RunX. And if you're interested in those things, the article has a lot of details about how these tools work and what they were doing and so forth, especially if you're a government agency in Asia. A company called Pushwoosh, we had like the lead-in of nonsense, Pushwoosh. You can't say that very easily. Pushwoosh claims to be based in the United States. The company claims on their site that they provide contract support and software to many, many different organizations, and that their code is used in at least 8,000 different apps on Google Play and Apple Store. So very common code library. Pushwoosh code was also found in the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and also at the U.S. Army. Okay, so what? I mean, it's got a weird name, but so what? It says a U.S.-based company. The Army says fine. Sounds pretty normal. But a Reuters report, so this report just came out, Reuters found, and they revealed that the company might be misrepresenting itself. Now, they were never conclusive about this, mind you, and they never said absolutely, but they basically said that both the CDC and the Army have dumped the code at this point, and that Pushwoosh has made different and separate filings with the United States and Russian government that provide conflicting information. So the company is incorporated in the United States in the state of Delaware, which is really common because Delaware has really nice incorporation laws. The company listed its address as being in Washington, D.C., California, and Maryland. Again, nothing new. But they make no mention of being a Russian company. But in their filing in the Russian government, it says that it's based in Novosibirsk. I probably didn't pronounce that. Sorry, Russian friends. Founder Max Konev said that they have no connection to the Russian government of any kind and was very proud to be a Russian citizen and had not tried to hide this in the United States. The Reuters report, though, said that the addresses listed on the website and their marketing materials are not connected to the company in the United States. And when they went to one of the addresses physically, they found out it was the home of a friend of Konev who said he had nothing to do with the company. The company also has a large number of social media accounts, which are apparently fictional U.S.-based executives. It's starting to sound pretty shady to me, but Konev said this was a marketing tactic that was the result of a marketing firm creating all these fake accounts, not an attempt to hide the Russian origin, which he was very, very proud. Reuters did go on to say there was no evidence that Pushwoosh was sharing intel with the Russian government, but that it certainly was not a precedent, and that the Russian government can force Russian companies to share whatever they want whenever they want. So I don't know. I mean, it's very, it's definitely something to look into if you're using that code. I know some of you are into crypto, and I'm sure, as you were aware, FTX and 134 affiliated crypto firms filed for bankruptcy on Friday, and the CEO of FTX quit. The company appointed a former Enron CEO who oversaw the liquidation of the Enron company, and I wasn't involved in it, but I was working down there in Texas at the time, and I had friends who got blasted by that. The article says that FTX was optimistically, and it's quote, optimistically valued at $32 billion US in January, so it suddenly collapsing is kind of a shock. But now more exchanges are suspending withdrawals due to what they basically called a lack of clarity about FTK.com, FTK.us, and Alameda. BlockFi, AX, and Ikagi all have suspended withdrawals. So all these people are tied into this company somehow. And, there's not a lot of controls around this stuff. So you know how in the United States we got all these controls after the Great Depression started in 1929 and people were drawing all their money out. HBit Limited in Hong Kong said that it had been unable to withdraw $18 million in US dollars in crypto from FTX, and that those were customer assets. So that was, of course, affecting their business. It's definitely worth reading this article if you're holding any crypto deposits of significance. I think my Stank coin is trading at number so small they had reported like 10 to the minus 500 or something like that, and it has a total value of 0.01 cents for 100 billion shares. You know the usual crypto outcome. So lots of fun there. Github is now offering a mechanism for security researchers to report vulnerabilities found in public repositories, but to report them privately. Now, this is this Hobson's choice kind of thing when you find a vulnerability, right? Because if you find something and you publicly announce it and say, hey, guess what? If you do this and this and this, you get, root access and you can do remote code execution, then guess what? People are going to start using the repository to attack you and other people. And so you could actually get in a liability situation with that. And you gave a really nice tip to everybody. And if you write a really nice proof of concept, then everybody can quickly automate that into their attack code. So it's better to report it privately, but there's not always a mechanism for that. And that old, I'm going home after the card game with all my monies that I just won, so maybe I'll be out in the alley for a while, and somebody decides to come out and cut your throat. Yeah, that only happened in a video game. Only a video game that I got banned from. So yeah, that was called Pit of Iserbius or something like that. But yeah, it was a video game. But anyway, there's not really a standard for reporting to the GitHub developers. And, if you go to different repositories have different contact information, it can be very, very confusing. But with this new system, a researcher can report to a public repository using this private approach, and then the owner of the repository can accept it, which means they're willing to collaborate with you to fix the flaw. They can respond with questions, or they can simply refuse the report or reject it, in which case I guess you could do whatever you want. So if you go to the main page of your repository, click Settings, then Code, Security, and Analysis in the Security section, you can choose to enable this feature to allow people to report on your repository. So very good idea, and I think that will be a step forward for GitHub. I've been saying this for years. K-12 schools are a top target for attack because they often have little to no security, and often they may not even have any tech support. I remember years ago, a friend of mine who taught high school in a distant state, not Rhode Island, and he taught English. and he got tasked with managing the school's brand new shiny network that they got with a grant. And he called me one night and he said, "You know something about networking, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "What's a router?" And I was like, "Well, and sort of explained what a router does." And I was like, "Why are you asking?" And he was like, "Well, I've got like 10 of them I need to get set up at my school district." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And so, anyway, in response to that, he ended up being in charge of all the school's networks. So later he's like a network admin, and he's just like, "I wish I had some training, but I'm a network admin already." And in another distant state, I was part of a program where they paid actual consultants to go to K-12 schools and help. And we went to some that had networks that were really Wild Westy. They were basically under the control of some 12-year-old kid named Bert. And, he's telling everybody what to do, and he's telling the teachers, "I get an A," or everything disappears, right? It was pretty amazing. But this report said that the education sector's cyber maturity lags way behind other sectors, usually due to limited resources, and that nearly 1/5, or 20%, were spending less than 1% of their IT budgets on cybersecurity. And then when you realize that their IT budget is like $75 and some Subway tokens, that's not very much. But 81% of the respondents said they had not fully implemented multi-factor. And usually when people say we haven't fully implemented, it means they haven't implemented it at all, but it sounds better that way. And 29% admitted that they do not use multi-factor authentication. But K-12 schools are target rich for attackers because they're weak. They have a lot of data about students and teachers and other ransomable stuff. So CISA has provided guidance and tools for school security that you can get it with a no-cost membership if you join the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center on the CISA site. There's links to all that in the article, so check that out if you're a K-12 administrator trying to make ends meet. Well, last week I talked about liability on the Friday rant, and here's yet another case of this very same thing I was talking about last week. The Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Boy, had to get extra donations to put all that on the sign. But the Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago reached a settlement in a lawsuit where parents of patients were affected by 2 different data breach incidents that were caused by employee wrongdoing. So good old insider threat. Under the terms of the settlement, the hospital is now being required to increase its monitoring of employee access, imagine that, improve data protection measures, wow, and provide additional employee training on handling medical records. So, stuff that you should have been doing already. But an employee had improperly accessed patient medical records for about a year in 2018 until 2019 before they got caught and summarily fired. But then another incident was found that another employee had been accessing patient records since 2018 through 2020. And I'm like, they didn't say what they were accessing, but you can imagine in medical records, which has everything there is to know about you, including your hat size. So they've got all this information on these kids and their parents and their insurance and their medical condition and their prescriptions and all. And I don't know what they were accessing, but that's not good. The court has ruled that harm was caused, even though the hospital denied they were liable. This is that, well, it wasn't our fault. This is, bad employee kind of thing. But the hospital said they weren't liable, but they only reached a settlement to end the litigation. But it's coming. So this is 2 stories in 2 weeks, and we've seen the same kind of thing. Well, Peter Klimek from Imperva is going to join us now. Peter is the Director of Technology in the Office of the CTO at Imperva. And as we enter the season of holidays and eating and shopping, well, guess what? Retailers are going to see their threat surface increase more than my waistline because they're going to be big targets for ransomware because, you really don't want to be a retailer who's not operating during Black Friday kind of stuff. They're going to be targets of skimming. They're going to be targets of all kinds of other scams. And Imperva put out a report that was on automated threats being the biggest source of risk for retailers. And so Peter's going to tell us about the report. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you for having me on the show, and it's a pleasure to be here. So as you mentioned, we just recently released our State of E-commerce report for this year, and this specifically looks into the threats that we see specifically in the e-commerce sector, because it's really unique when you start to kind of pull it out, and especially as we come into the biggest shopping part of the year, or shopping season of the year. It's a really, really critical time for retailers to make sure that their applications and websites and services are all secure. So there's a couple major key themes that we saw. So first and foremost, this season's a little bit different than what we saw last year. So last year, from a broader macroeconomic trend, the big theme was really that there was really limited inventory, but really high demand. This year, a lot of the supply chain issues are kind of evened out. There's not really as many big ticket items, but at the same time, lots of these retailers are under pressure right now to minimize operating expenses. And one of the biggest challenges that they have now with this is that over 40% of their traffic, all traffic that goes to online retailers, actually just comes from bots. And this is both good bots and bad bots. But when you start zooming in on that a little bit deeper, we see that over 24% of that traffic is what we consider to be bad bots. And so for retailers in particular, they are ripe for attack in a couple of different attack vectors, namely price scraping, inventory hoarding. You commonly might hear about things like Grinch bots, and then also ATO fraud, account takeover fraud. Those are some of the really, really big attack trends, and we can dive into those in a little bit more detail here.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I always think about bots in retail, primarily from the perspective of like they're doing either price scraping stuff, trying to collect data, which I don't know that that's a bad bot. I mean, that's just competition, right? I mean, if my company is trying to find out what everybody's selling a guitar for and I want to know what it sells for, that's not necessarily a bad bot or doing anything harmful. But when I see all the tickets sell out for a show in less than a nanosecond when a show comes online and all the tickets are immediately on some other site for 100 times retail value, I kind of get the feeling maybe that wasn't, a bunch of 12-year-old kids buying those tickets, that it may have been a bot. What do you think the biggest threat vector there is then? So as we go into this like purchasing, season, what's the big bot threat?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the biggest changes in trends that we've seen over the last couple of years, and it really only accelerated this year, is that the overall attack sophistication of the bots is increasing. And so when we segment bots and we look at bot traffic, we have really three categories that we look at. We say there are simple bots. Simple bots are basically, you can almost think of it as like curl scripts and things like that, stuff that's very, very easy to write. And you can often do it in a matter of minutes. And these bots don't usually try to hide who they are. They're really kind of rudimentary. We have the more moderate sophistication bots. These are the ones that are using more commercial off-the-shelf tools or open source frameworks, your headless browsers, Phantom.js, some of that type of technology that's often used actually in the application testing world. And then we have our advanced bots themselves that basically are the ones that are going to be more bespoke. They're things that are actually customized and developed by professional engineers to get around bot mitigation technologies and really try to evade any sort of detection mechanisms. And so what we've seen now is that those latter categories, the moderate and advanced bots, which will employ more evasiveness or use a lot more evasive techniques, that now makes up over 2/3 of all bad bot traffic to these retailers. And so it's really difficult for the security teams to actually go and get a handle on these bots. And in particular, one of the biggest trends that we saw this year was that the number of those bots that were using anonymizing tools, so not just things like Tor networks and anonymous proxies, but also now moving into using residential IP addresses, that jumped pretty drastically from 3.5% last year to nearly 33% this year. And now that compares to a broader industry trend where we only saw that jump go from about 1.5% to about 13.5%. So in particular, retailers, they see the evasiveness of these bots really increasing. And in particular now, what they're going after is exactly as you said, they're going for these limited edition items, a lot of things that basically are harder to get, and they offer the value or the ability for them to resell it. Last year, it was all about PS5s and Switches and video cards and things like that. This year it's a little bit different. This year we're looking at things that are very limited edition gaming items. And for any gamers that are out there, they know that God of War Ragnarok just came out last week. And one of the first evidence or first instances that we saw of this was that the God of War Ragnarok limited editions instantly sold out and now are selling online for 3 times the price.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I feel about those kind of bots. There's a part of me, I hate them when they're working against me, but I like them when they're working for me. I remember a long time ago, I had written as a snipe bot for eBay. And it didn't do anything illegal. It wasn't trying to harm anybody. It was just I got sick of losing bids on something I was trying to buy in the last microsecond of the auction because somebody outbid me. And I was like, how's this happening? This guy beats me every time. And I was like, I'm going to write a script that will actually do this, and it will just put my final bid in as fast as possible, microseconds before. And so, the idea that a bot can go buy something for you or do something productive kind of appeals to me. But then at the same time, when these things are completely controlled, and PS5 is a good example, I wanted to get a PS5, and I was like, what's going on? It would say, we now have PS5s available at Best Buy. And I would think, okay, I'll run down there and get one. I get there, they'll all be gone. You look at their website, sold out. And guess what? They're on eBay for, I think the retail on them was like $399. They were selling for $1,800 on eBay. I was like, who's buying this stuff? Are you insane? It's a gaming platform. You're going to pay $1,800. But do you think that this is something that should be illegal, or is it something that is just going to change the nature of how we do business?
Yeah, so I guess before getting into the legality, I think the changing in the way that people do business, that's one of the bigger trends that we've seen over the last year or two. And that's specifically not just people going and writing their own bots and building those things out, but also the emergence of bots as a service. This, I think, was especially prolific starting last year when things became very, very difficult to find, was that more and more bot operators found that the better business model for them is just to take their bots that they've written and to sell them as a service to people that want to go and try to compete for these services. And so what that did is ultimately just raise the bar for everyone else that they had to start using and adopting these types of bots. Now, we've seen in the past instances to try to legislate around this issue. The Bots Act is probably the most prominent one. That's actually bots standing for Better Online Ticket Sales. That was legislation that passed a few years ago that specifically targets ticket sales online and putting in some mechanisms and safeguards around that and being able to, for the, I believe it's the FTC, to actually go after bot authors that are doing this at large scale. Now, similarly, or I guess one of the biggest challenges is that act only focuses on online ticket sales. There was a piece of legislation that was introduced last holiday season called the Grinch Bots Act. And as the name alludes to, it was designed specifically to go after Grinch bot authors. But in this case, it didn't actually pass through our legislative houses. And ultimately, I think the hope of that becoming actual legislation, I think, is pretty thin right now.
Yeah, I like I said, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. Part of it, it's like electronic trading. When electronic trading first came about with the stock market, there was a vast amount of concern about essentially bots triggering trades, and of course there was a great collapse that was caused by electronic trade triggers that were all set and resulted in some changes in how electronic trading is done with the stock market. So I don't think it's going to ever get to where you can get rid of bots. It's just going to have to get to where you find some kind of middle ground between, we put a product out, every single one of them, and of course manufacturers love that, right? If you're making Elmo dolls and every single one of them is bought up at retail price by some bot and put in a warehouse in New Jersey and then sold at 10 times the price, so what? You got your retail price out of it. But at the same time, your consumers really suffer in this. But maybe consumers will strike back with their own bots, and it'll turn into a giant bot war of that kind of thing. What about denial of service and things like that? Are we seeing sort of steady as she goes on denial of service from bots, or is that also a growing area?
DDoS attacks is another one where we had some pretty interesting trends that have changed this year. Now, in particular, two of the big kind of highlights in here is the first one is that layer 7 DDoS attacks. Some of the techniques that are used are getting more sophisticated. So they're using new HTTP pipelining and multiplexing techniques that really are allowing botnet authors to just smash their previous records. So 2 examples that we have is in one attack earlier this year in the spring, we saw over 25 billion requests over a 5-hour period. And this was launching from a botnet consisting of about 50,000 IP addresses, just a little bit shy of 50,000. And so this was basically at a peak load of around just shy of 4 million requests per second, which is just a staggering amount of traffic when you think about it. That was one such attack. And then in spring as well, we saw another one, which actually managed to even exceed that in terms of the overall rate of attack. So this one was hitting 10 million requests per second. And it was originating from a smaller size botnet of only about 12,000 IPs. So the layer 7 DDoS attacks are really being refined and they're hitting new records. And it's not just us that's seeing that. All the other DDoS mitigation providers are also seeing that as well. And then the other major trend is, those big attacks that are operating at layer 3, layer 4, that are basically always reported in, a terabit per second or, hundreds of gigabits per second. Basically, now what we've seen is that attacks larger than 100 gigabits per second, they're just the norm now. And even attacks greater than 500 gigabits per second, those increase nearly threefold. And so basically, it's just, old news now. Stuff that previously would have generated massive headlines are now what we expect pretty much on a regular basis.
Where do you think all these bots sit? Are they being hosted on cloud servers, or are they still like old school bots where they were being put on people's desktops and, in these old zombie attacks and things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for a lot of the kind of the bad bots that are going after retailers specifically, and they're looking to do things like price scraping and things like that, cloud service providers tend to be a pretty big source of that. Although we don't see any major trends or changes from retail versus other industries. Ultimately, I think it's somewhere around the 45% of attacks will actually originate from the cloud service providers. But more and more, what we do see on at least the kind of the scraping, scalping types of bots, those will originate more from residential IP addresses than they have in the past. A lot of mobile networks as well. That was one of the earlier findings that we had from our bad bot report earlier this year, with just the increase in bots that were not only using mobile applications and APIs, but then also specifically originating from mobile networks to make them look a little bit more realistic. So that was one major trend. Now, from a DDoS side, it's a little bit different because by and large, these are going to be attacks that are going to be launched from basically zombie nodes in a botnet. So you can think of compromised IoT devices as being one of the big points for this. And of course, compromised infrastructure that's sitting out in cloud service providers tends to be another primary source.
So I always kind of ask this type of question the same way, which is about 3 different companies. So if I'm a retailer, and my 3 different retailers are, one is, Grandpa's Toy Store, which is owned by, my grandfather, and that's it. And one is, Grandpa's Toy Franchise, which is owned by, he owns 12 stores across the tri-state area. And then, of course, Grandpa Inc., which owns every toy store in the world, or toy store in the world. Like, what are some actions that different people on these levels should be doing prior to this big retail season to prevent these kind of things from happening to them?
Yeah, so a couple of major trends and changes that we've seen around this area. The first one is implementing technology like waiting rooms. So effectively, it's just an online queuing system that really kind of just mimics the way that you have to get in line in a store in order to buy products. Waiting rooms is a really effective way to be able to manage and mitigate those types of bot traffic. The other ones that we've seen is certain retailers have adjusted to more of a waitlist model, where they've started to basically just have people signing up for a waitlist and then they get their items in that way. That's actually how I got my PS5 this year. Finally,
me too.
Was being on a waitlist.
I was a combination of those 2 things. When I got one, it was like I was on. I had signed up and said, "Let me know when I have a chance," and then they sent me an email said, "On Thursday you'll have a chance." Yep. And then when I went on Thursday, it said you're now in the waiting room and you're waiting in line. And so, so they were obviously trying to fight off the bots.
Yep, exactly. And so those are great mechanisms to be able to do it. Certain retailers, Best Buy, I think, was a good example. And I think Walmart did the same thing with high-priced items. They started tying them to their premium subscription services. I think with Amazon, they did it with Amazon Prime as well. And then the other things that a lot of the retailers are doing, of course, are just implementing bot mitigation software. The bot mitigation software has become extremely advanced in its ability to detect and pick out these types of events. And so being able to actually stay ahead of them is the other great mechanism and way to be able to do it. Unfortunately, for maybe the smaller retailers, that's a little bit further out of line. And so sometimes just resorting back to doing in-person pickups and in-person purchases is the best avenue for them.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Well, thanks, Peter Klimek, for joining us on the Security Weekly News to talk about the bot world, and I'm sure we'll have you on again too sometime soon, and or anytime you like. It's always fun to talk with you. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me. It was a great pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And finally, since Elon won't send me that Tesla X, and I mean, he said he would, and carbon fiber wheels, Elon, remember, but he still hasn't done it, so I can't not barb him again. So during the latest $8 check mark debacle, I know you've seen this because it's just too ridiculous, but a fake verified account, listen to this, a fake verified account, just that alone is ridiculous, but they had paid the $8 for instant verification, and they posed as Eli Lilly. And Eli Lilly, if you aren't familiar with them, is a very large, multinational pharmaceutical company, and they are, I won't bash them, but I mean, they sell insulin at pretty high prices. And insulin, if you don't know what that is used for people who are diabetic, and if they don't have it, it's bad. But this fake verified account said, they tweeted that they were excited to announce that insulin is now free. And that tweet got 1,500 retweets and 10,000 likes before it was taken down. And so this had a huge impact on the stock price of Eli Lilly, because the price went from $368 a share to $346 a share almost instantly. And it said that it cost billions of dollars, and it erased it off the books. So, look, folks, next time you want to punk a giant global conglomerate with a fake Twitter account, with a fake verified check mark, give me about 5 minutes notice, okay? And I'll sell it all short and we'll be good. I mean, that's all I'm asking here. The real Doug White tweeted, "Kill moose and squirrel." But this segment was sponsored by Imperva, so be sure and visit securityweekly.com/Imperva to learn more. And that is the news. Thanks, Peter, and I will see you on Friday.